Hello and welcome. In today's tutorial, we're gonna go through how to set up authentication using a tool called PassportJS. So to do authentication, we need to do a few things. First, we need to install npmi passport local mongoose. Okay. Now let's install npmi passport. And let's also install passport local. And also install npmi express session. Okay, so that should be all the things we need. So now let's get started. All right, let's do some organization. Let's make a new folder. Let's actually close the client for a second. Let's make a new folder here and call it models. So this is where all the database models are gonna be. Let's make a new one for the user. So user.js. Okay, and so we're gonna import mongoose. And we're gonna set the user schema, new mongoose dot schema. So we're gonna have a username field which is of type string and it's required, so there has to be some username, otherwise you can't save this document in the database. And unique true, so it has to be unique, so it's not gonna let us save the same exact username in the database, so we won't have duplicates. And same with password, require true, but password can be duplicate. It doesn't matter. Yeah, so type string as well. And let's go ahead and export this. So user first, like let's make it a mongoose model, mongoose.model based on user with the name user based on user schema, and we're going to export that. Alright, so that's our model. So for authentication, we're going to use the library called passport. So for that, we're going to have to import passport. So passport is equal to require passport. And also we're going to import session, which is express session. Alright, now that we have them imported, let's go ahead and use them. So I'm going to use app.use session, and we're going to pass it an object that contains the secret. So just run some random thing that others can't guess, and we're going to set resave to false and save uninitialized to false. These are some default values that you can give them. Don't worry too much about what they mean, except the secret, which is basically the key it uses to encode your data. So it's important, the secret, other people can't see the secret, and it's kind of complicated. All right, so yeah, now we need to do a bunch of other stuff. For that, let's make a new folder. So let's make this a bit more organized. So we're gonna have a new folder called services, and let's make the file called auth.js. So in here, we're gonna store the majority of the settings we're gonna set for PassportJS. So let's make a function called init passport, and it's gonna take an argument passport. And so passport takes the function serialize user. So this function is basically used to determine what information passport is gonna store in the session. So we pass a function to it with a user object and a callback, and on the process next tick, we're going to call the callback function, and we're going to pass it null and the object that we want to store in the session. So user.id and username. Okay, so that's it for that. Now we're going to have another function which determines how our session, like passport, is gonna use the session to determine what we have. So like basically undoing the serialization. So that also is pretty similar. Takes a user, takes a callback, and on processes next tick. This basically just returns the user, nothing special. Alright, so that should be that. Now we need one more thing. We need a passport.use. Now we need to create a local strategy. Passport uses local strategies to determine how user that is determined if the user is authenticated or not. So like basically how you check for the username and password. So we need to write it in a way so that checks the user and the password in the database, and if it's correct, it's gonna log them in basically. So for that, it's gonna have we're gonna create a new local strategy. We'll call it strategy, and actually we need to import this. So let's go to the very top and import local strategy. And let's also import the user model because we're gonna have to look at the database to find the user. So it's gonna go up and the models and user.js. Okay, that should be good. Now let's create the strategy. So strategy takes a function called verify. That takes a username, password, and a callback. Alright, and depending how we call this callback, it's gonna know whether the user is authenticated or not. Okay, so now we basically just use the mongoose's function to find the user in the database that matches the username. So find one username is username. So if we do find it, we're gonna do some stuff. We're gonna basically check the password, and depending on the scenario, we're gonna do something. But if there's an error that happens, so if an error happens, we're gonna console log it first, error getting the user, and then we're gonna return callback. And when we call the callback function like this with a single parameter, that means the user is not authenticated. Single parameter that has something in it. Alright, so if we do find the user, we're gonna first see, just double check if the user is there. So if the user is empty or something, or not found, we're gonna say user not found. And we're gonna call a callback and just say message user not found. Okay, so if the second parameter is false, that means they're not authenticated. And the message just for like the person, if they want to look at the message why this happened, they can do. Okay, and then if not user, we're going to do that, and then now we're going to check the password. So if user.password, if the password is incorrect, the user's password is not equal to the password that the front end provided, we're going to console log incorrect password, and then we're going to return callback again with the false as the second one, to indicate that the user is not authenticated. Okay, and then the final scenario is, so if they get here, that means the user was found and the password was correct. So in this case, they're authenticated, so we're gonna return callback with null and then user, so no longer false for the second parameter. Okay, so yeah, now the next thing we want to do is, let's just add a helper function that checks if the user is authenticated. So the way to check if the user is authenticated, we're gonna do request response next. So basically it's really easy. If the request has a function called is authenticated, and if that returns true, that means the user is authenticated, so we call the next. The next basically means continue. User is authenticated, they're okay to go. But if they're not authenticated, we're going to send the response back 401 not authorized, to tell the front end that they're not authorized and we're not going to go to the next function in the stack. And what this next actually is when someone like gets a route, they're gonna, so the first parameter is a route, and there's like as many parameters as you want after that, and each of these can have a next. If this has a next, you can have another function right here. So here you can have like another function like that, and if you call next in the previous one, if you call next here, then it's gonna get in here into the next function, and so on and so forth. So you can stack as many functions as you want. So yeah, let's just undo this. Alright, good. Okay, now we just need to export this so we can use this in our main function, app.js. Okay, we're gonna just export in passport and ensure authenticated. Alright, so we should be done in terms of basically most of it. So we'll just go back to app.js and we're gonna call this function. So first let's import the authentication file. So let's call it auth service is equal to require services slash auth.js. Alright, and this seems to be a problem. Oh, this should be required. There we go. Hopefully now it's okay. Okay, I'm full of misspelling. Where's mongoose? There we go. Now. Okay, this error is because I forgot to remove the user model here, which I already created. So let's remove all of this. Now that should fix it. Perfect. Alright, so now let's add the final part of passport.js configuration. So let's use auth service dot init passport, and we're gonna pass a passport. Alright, so this is basically gonna do everything in here. Add all of these functions to the passport, so passport knows how to do all of those things, such as serializing the user. Alright, and then we need to do one more thing, app.use passport.session. Alright, so now I think everything should be set up for us to use this. Now let's go ahead and test this. And to do that, we're gonna add authentication check to the paintings route. So instead of just calling this function, here are the paintings, and just giving them the paintings, we're gonna first ensure that they're authenticated. So we're gonna use auth service dot ensure authenticated, and so if in this function ensure authenticated, so if the user is authenticated, next is going to be called. That means they're going to go past this and go into the next function, which is getting the actual paintings. But if they don't, they're going to get 401 unauthorized request back, so they know they're not authorized. Okay, now let's set up the login route to actually log in the user. So instead of doing this stuff, all we're gonna do is gonna call passport.authenticate and use the local strategy. So when we do it like this, it's gonna use the strategy we gave it here. Alright, and let's also add a new route called logout. Okay, and in here we're just going to request, well, first it's going to be a function, so request response next, and we're going to go request.logout function error. So it's just a callback function that has an error, so it's going to call the request's logout function, and If there's an error logging out, we're going to continue. But if there's no error, we're going to send status 200, so to say successfully log out. All right, so yeah, that should be for the logout. And now the register route. The register route is doesn't actually use much of Passport stuff. So the only thing it does is just like create a user in the database. So first of all, if they haven't provided both username, if not username or not password, so both username and passport have to be defined, otherwise we're not gonna allow them to create a new user. A user has to have a password and username. So we're gonna send response.status 400.send username or password not provided. So these statuses that we're sending, you can send anything you want, but you should like send the correct one based on the situation. So 400 means bad request, so that means like the request had something missing or something like that. So username and password not provided in this case, for example. Okay, now if the username and password is provided, we get to here. So in here we're just gonna create user model. I think we haven't imported user model, so let's import that. Model /user.js. Okay, so now we have user model. So we're going to create a user, username, password. So we're going to create a user with username and password field sets, and then after it's created, we're going to console the log successfully created user, and then user.username. We're going to console log the username, so it's going to say which user we created, and we're going to send response.status 200. So 200 means okay, everything's fine. Created user, so the front end knows that we created user. If something happens, something wrong happens, we're gonna use a callback function. So we're gonna console.error creating user and error, and we're gonna send the status for 500. So 500 means something wrong happened on the server. Okay, now that should be good, and I think that's all we need. And actually we should not have this here anymore. Yeah, so we're gonna call as soon as the creation finishes or an error happens, we're gonna send the response, but we're not gonna send the response before that. So I actually forgot that I also need to add something to the user schema for authentication. So we're gonna have to import passport local mongoose. Okay, and we're gonna add it as a plugin to the user schema. Alright, so I found also I was not calling the actual function session here, so I added this, and now we're getting new error, so that's a good sign. I think I misspelled something. User, yep, where did the user? Now hopefully. Okay, now we registered Al with a password of 1. Okay, perfect. So let's first go to the home screen. As you can see, we get not authenticated. Let's go to login and try and login. So Al1. Okay, perfect. It says not found. Okay, so the problem is I'm not passing failure and success redirect. I think you need at least one of them passed. So we need to pass an object, success redirect, and go like that. And now it's gonna work. Alright, L1. Okay, so I think we just logged in, we just didn't redirect. So if you go to home now, we can see here on the paintings and stuff, unauthenticated. So now let's go and add a logout button to home. So home.html, we're gonna add a button, class button, let's go danger, which is a red button, from Bootstrap, and add logout, and add an ng click. So when you click it, it's gonna call the function logout. So now let's go to home and add a logout button. So scope dot logout is equal to function. So in here, let's see, do I have logout? I have not logout set here, so let's add a logout as well, so we can make a request to backend for logging out. So logout, and we're gonna hit the logout endpoint, and it's gonna be a post still, and call this logout, and we don't need to pass any parameters, it's just gonna log you out. All right, now back to home. So we're gonna import auth service, and we're gonna call auth service dot logout. Okay, and then once it finishes successfully, we're gonna have a function console.log logged out, and we're gonna redirect the user, so state.go to the login screen. Okay, and we need to also import state. All right, so but if the logout fails, let's see console.error failed to logout. All right, so now it should be set. So we get logout screen. Okay, we're not authenticated because the server is started. Let's log out. Let's actually just go to login anyway. Okay. Oh, I have two .dens. Okay, let's just go like, okay. Let's go to login screen. Let's log in as Al and 1. Trying to log in. And actually in the login, let's redirect the user here as well. So let's import state. So once you press login, it's gonna go to the home page. Okay. State.go to the home state. Actually, yeah, this is capital. All right, let's try again. So login Al1, login. It says not authenticated. All right, is that capital? Okay, let's just create a new user. Al11 register. Al1 login. There we go. So we're authenticated. If you go to login and back to home page, we're still authenticated. Once you press logout, go back to the home page, we're not authenticated, and we get the status unauthorized. Okay, all right, that should be it for the login. So you can register, login, and you get authenticated or not based on whether you've been logged in or not. Now there's one more thing we need to do to make our app more secure. If you go to the database, you can see that our password is actually stored as it is, and that is a very bad thing to do in terms of security. So we need to fix that. We need to actually hash our password. So we basically kind of need to encode it, so if they look at our database, they can't see the actual password, and they just see like a weird string of numbers and text. So to do that, we're going to use a library called Bcrypt. So first let's install it. Okay, so there's two things we need to do when we are registering. We need to use it. So first let's import it. Okay, so now in our register route, before we actually create the user, we want to hash our password. So we can use bcrypt-hash, and we give it a password. We give it like the basically how secure we want it to be. The more secure it is, but it's gonna take more time. So I think I'm just gonna go 10 for now, and it's gonna have a callback function with an error and a hashed result. So in here, if error happens, we're gonna console.log it first, and we're gonna send a response of 500 to the client. But if an error doesn't happen, now we're gonna create the user. Okay, so this is gonna actually use the hash. So we can't actually just do like this, because if you go to the user model, you can see the field is called password, and if we do it like this, it's gonna attempt to create an object with a field called username and with a field called hash. So we need to actually rename it. So we're gonna say the field password is gonna have the value hash. Okay, so it's gonna store it as a hash. So let's save it and let's go create another user. Let's call it John and Doe and register it. Error is not defined. Oh, I misspelled. There we go. Let's try again. There we go. I think we got it. So now if you check here, it's gonna have John and it's gonna have a weird version of the password. So if someone gets into your system, they won't be able to see the actual password of the users. Okay, so that's the first step. So when you're registering, it's gonna store it in a hashed format. Now when we are authenticating, we also need to change it so it checks it correctly, otherwise it's not gonna match, because it's right now it's in a weird format in the database. So for that we can use, let's import Bcrypt first. Alright, and we're gonna go, so as soon as you find the user, we're gonna, and if the user is defined, we're gonna use Bcrypt. So Bcrypt has a function called compare, and we pass it the password that the front gave us and the user object's password, which is the one in the database, and we give it error and result. So for a call, so this is a callback function that has error and result as the parameters. So Bcrypt is going to give us an error and a result parameter. So if there's an error, that means there was an error encrypting the user. So in that case, we're just going to go console.error, error, and then we're going to return use the callback function to say user is not authenticated. Alright, if there's no error and we have a result, that means this is a success scenario. So we just call the callback for user is authenticated. So null and then the user object. Okay, and then the other, so otherwise the password is incorrect, so the user is not authenticated. So you can just copy it like that from here and do it like that. So we're going to call it a callback function, null, false, and incorrect password. Alright, so we should be good. Let's go ahead and try and log in as John now. Okay, as you can see, it says not authenticated, but if you refresh the page, you get authentication. That's because it takes a bit of time for it to encrypt our password, and our front end has an error, so the timing doesn't work, so you have to refresh for it to know actually it's authenticated. To fix that, we're gonna go to login, and so here we're calling the logging function in the backend, but then immediately we're going to the home. That's why before the first line is done, it's gonna get to home, so it won't be authenticated yet once it gets there. So we want to actually use .then, so whenever this finishes, then we're gonna go to home. Alright, and then we also always want to have a catch. For now we're just going to catch up, or we're not going to console log, but you should always console log. For the purpose of this tutorial, we're not gonna put anything in the catch. Okay, so this should now fix it. Let's log out, log in as John Doe, and as you can see, we are authenticated. And yeah, alright, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.